As we are going to go ahead and get started because it is that time. Anybody else that comes in will just catch up. If during the thing you'll keep yourself on mute, that would be great. Unless you have, have something to say, you want to jump in, you have a question, please jump in, right? We're a small group. As long as we stay a small group, please jump in, right? If we had like a ton of people, I'd be like, sorry, y'all. Right? But for now, please jump in or raise your hand on the chat. And I actually don't see the chat readily in front of me. So unmute yourself and jump in. Come and go as you please, do your thing, whatever comes up. You'll get the recording of this tomorrow or the next day as soon as we get it cleaned up and get it back out to you. So you'll have full access to that if you miss anything. That's totally fine. All right, so we'll start each of these with, oh my goodness, because I'm screen sharing. All right, we'll start each of these classes with just a little intro so that you kind of know who you're getting your information from. So I'm a behavior analyst, a board certified behavior analyst. And if you go to the BACB, which is the Behavior Analyst Certification Board.com, there's a place where you can search to see people if they are really who they say they are. And you can put my name in there. And that's Jarrell, Jarel, Jarrell Cole Gordon, and you will find me listed in Virginia as a BCBA in active status. So there you go. That's how you can look me up. But otherwise, I've got about 20 years experience working with kids with behavioral challenges and all sorts of disabilities and things in education as a teacher through the public school system, private school system. I created a set of clinics for kids with autism, little guys 2 to 6, to really prepare them for kindergarten. And there's a handful of those in Southwest Virginia now. So that's going on. And now I'm just trying to disseminate some of this information, to a much wider audience, because I get a lot of requests, and I often feel like the guy with the story with the starfish, where the guy's like trying to throw them one at a time. And it's like, well, it matters to that one. And it does, but also I can't keep up. So hopefully we can get some information out there and people can collectively feel some relief in their relationships with their kids. So that's kind of who I am and where I'm coming from. These classes are primarily based on the science of ABA, which is applied behavior analysis. It's all about behavior is a science, and it looks at it as in a very observable, measurable way. And the majority of what I talk about comes from there, and the science comes from there, right? So that the science is sound, but I also flavor it in with a lot of my own experience and exposure to things that I've really seen make an impact with kids, like mindfulness and somatic experiencing and need-based communication and some different things like that. So they kind of get flavored in with some of those perspectives. So that's where we're coming from. What you see on the slides are really the science of ABA. So as we talk through it, the things that hopefully the slides themselves can be a little wordy, just because I'm bound to present it to you as the science, but we're going to talk through it. All right. So basically we're looking at, why do they do that tonight? Behaviors. I have a lot to say about behaviors of ourselves and children. And honestly, the more I look at the behavior of myself, the more I understand the behaviors of our children. So basically, when I start talking about behaviors, there's some pretty foundational things that you need to know of my core beliefs. Behaviors are neither good nor bad. We have this thing in our society where we like to say something is this or that. And we like to qualify it. And especially when it comes to behaviors, we like to say, and we do, were you good today? We say that, were you good today? Can you be good? I just need you to be good, right? And behaviors are neither good nor bad. They're just behaviors. They're just like something that has been learned to meet a need. It's just a tool in a toolbox, right? And I really want to spend a moment on that, because when we take that values sort of statement and we start to assign character value to a behavior, we're really creating a much bigger problem than what we started with. And what I mean by that is, when we say, have you been good? Right? Or you should feel bad because you did that. I'm not saying that the person should feel pleasure because they did that. But what I'm saying is we start to attach emotion and we start to attach value to something that's just a tool. You know, if I use a hammer to drive a nail, I'm not the hammer. The hammer is not me. It's just the tool I use to get the job done. I could use that same hammer to put a hole in the wall, right? It's just a tool to get a job done. I'm not assigning a whole moral value system to the hammer. But that's what we tend to do with behavior and with our kids. We really, and I know why we do it, and we'll talk about that. I know that the reason we do it is we want them to have empathy. We want them to have an understanding of like, oh, my actions impact other people. We do want all of those things. But when we are dealing with behavior itself, we are walking a fine line, right? And it's kind of like when we start to say, you're a bad kid because you hit other kids. They hear that, they see it, they believe it. They're like, I do this thing and that makes me awful. And I got to tell you, they don't even start working on that till their 40s. Right? It sticks around. Think about when you were a kid. Think about all of those things that a well-meaning adult said to you to get you to do the thing that they wanted you to do. Right? And they probably said, stop doing this or do that, or because I said so, or the big one is, did you have a good day? Were you good today? And I got to tell you, if somebody said to me, were you good today? I would be like, well, that's a judgment. I can tell you I did this and 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 this. And you can make a decision how you feel about it, you know, because that's what you're asking me. You're not asking me, what did I do? You're asking me, how do I feel about what I did? And do I feel bad or good about it? And if I'm a kid, I probably don't even know, right? So it's just a whole layer of disconnecting that character value with your behavior, because we want to change the behavior. But what we don't want to do is, oh, you know what, let's change this behavior, but now let's spend however many years in therapy because we've told them that this behavior means they're an awful person, right? The behavior is gone, but now we're stuck with the results of our response, if that makes sense. So moving on from there, behaviors can be tools or barriers. And that's totally how I look at it. Anything that's happening, anything that I'm doing, it's getting in my way of something else I want to do, which makes it a barrier, or I'm like using it to meet some sort of need, right? I'm using it however I'm using it. It's a tool. It's like anything else, and it's something that I learned. Somebody taught me, thank you, Brandon. Somebody taught me that this behavior worked to get this need met. And that's all. It's just a tool. And if we can look at it, start looking at things as, oh, this person is using this as a tool to meet a need, we can start removing our own judgment. Our own judgment gets in the way more than anything else. How we feel about what they're doing gets in the way more than anything else, right? So let's just be cognizant of that piece. And I'm going to catch myself on this backwards point too. As we go along, when I catch myself growing and I realize that my documents haven't caught up, I'm gonna say something. I've really been moving away from this word OR. It's this or that. And I've been moving a lot more to like, can I replace that with and? Because I think we try to narrow things down to like, it's this thing or it's this thing, when quite often it's this thing and this thing and that one and that one and that one and all of these too, right? And so they can be tools and barriers. The same behavior can be both a tool and a barrier, right? And so I'm going down to the next one. They can be destructive or constructive. They can be destructive and constructive. The same, like I said, the hammer can build a wall and it can tear it down, you know? And so our behaviors are no different. It's like, what are we actually using them for, right? So we'll look a lot into that. They always have a function, and that is the primary point of tonight's class and what we'll talk about. When we say function, we mean purpose. Behavior happens for a reason every single time. No behavior happens that doesn't have a reason, that doesn't have a purpose, that isn't meeting some underlying need. And a lot of times we can look at it on the surface and we say, oh, well, that kid's doing that for that, and I know what to do about that. But we don't dig down to the root. And like anything else that sticks around, especially, you can trace behaviors back to their root cause, you know? So just a little bit on that, because we're going to dive deeper here in a second. All behaviors are influenced by the environment, and influenced is putting it lightly. Okay. Every single behavior that's exhibited is in a response to something that came before it. And that's the environment. That's the container in which we live in, whatever that environment is. If it's your bathroom, your kitchen, your home, the school, the sidewalk, the whatever, okay? It's influenced by everything in that container with it. And a big thing that I'm going to keep talking about over and over and over as we go through this is we are in the environment too. And we're a huge influence. We're a huge influence. We're one of the biggest influences on what happens with our kids when we're in the environment with them. And so a big thing for us is to be doing the work that we're doing with our kids. We want to make sure that we're doing it with ourselves too. You know, when we start talking about assessing a situation and you walk into this environment, you walk into this container and let me start checking off what is all here. The first thing you want to check is what is all here. Have I brought some? How am I feeling about? Is this triggering me in such and such way? Right? So first, let's do a check-in with ourselves so that we're just aware that that's in the environment. I'm feeling really tired. I had a long day. I don't know that I have the patience for this right now. Just acknowledging that to yourself makes space for yourself, and then therefore helps the situation, right? So just noting that we are part of our environment and we have got to do a lot of checking, especially when we're dealing with something that feels bad. You know, nobody's taking a class because every interaction with their kid feels great. Like, you know, but there are things where you're like, okay, I'm just kind of, I don't know what to do here. What can we do, right? So moving on, behaviors can be individual and they can be group. So there's some, and it's such a huge thing. And I know you guys have all seen it. Whereas it's almost like a culture shift, or it's like a group collective thinking shift where one person might not bully that kid. But if I'm standing in a group of people, suddenly we're all bullying that kid and nobody really knows who started, you know what I mean? You'll do things in a group. You'll follow the energy of a group. You'll follow the patterns of a group very differently than you will as an individual, right? And so there are those things to look at as well. If you have a child with siblings, when those kids are together, it's a whole different ballgame than when they're one-on-one. If that makes sense. How are you guys on that? We good to go? All right. Okay, here is the big stuff to talk about. All behavior occurs for a reason, and this is called the function. And we're going to be on this slide for a little while. There's a lot of information here, all crunched down together. There's like a million, billion, zillion reasons why somebody does what they do. You know, why I'm sitting here, why I'm talking, why you're sitting here, why you're listening, like why you went to work, why you went to the grocery store, why you got out of bed, why you went to bed. Like every single thing that you do has a purpose, a function. It meets some sort of need. If it didn't meet some sort of need, you wouldn't do it. Or if you did it once, you wouldn't keep doing it, right? So, and there's any possible behavior you could ever possibly think of. So there's infinite numbers, but they can all be narrowed down to some pretty main groups. Excuse me, I got a tickle. The first one is access. And that basically means I need it. And I'm going to take a moment here to talk about the word need. My presentations used to say, I need it or I want it, right? And because I was like, and then I realized that I was having that conversation a lot with people. And they would say, they don't need it, they just want it. And I was realizing what a big judgment that was on our part. And then I was realizing that I actually have zero capacity or power or anything to communicate to anyone what someone else needs. I can't sit here and say, you need such and such. I'm not inside of you. I don't know what you need. And so by me always wondering, do they need it or do they want it? I was finding myself in a place where I was having to make a lot of judgments that I had absolutely no way of knowing. And so I just shifted my thinking from away from wants. If wants are irrelevant, and we can just start with, I need it. I've taken all judgment out of it. It's no longer this kid's making a choice just because they want it. No, there is a need not being met. When I start from that foundation, it really clears my stuff out of the way so that I can start to see what's happening with the kid, right? And so when I talk about need in these places, and if you catch me saying won't, if I don't catch myself, you feel free to do it. I do pretty good these days, right? Because I just like, it's not okay. I really want to hear what's happening, you know, with the other person. So access is all about, I need to get that thing, whatever that thing is, right? Whether it's, I need, and some of them are pretty basic. We have some pretty basic needs. I need air. I need water. I need shelter. I need clothing. I need food. I need hugs. I need physical interaction. I need toys. I need intellectual stimulation, like, right? What we hear when we hardly ever talk about access. And when you're talking to people and they're saying, oh, I wonder why your kid's doing that. This is what you hear. And you tell me, you can thumbs up me if you ever heard it or if you ever said it, because I've been there too. Oh, they just want attention. That's all that's happening here. They just want attention, right? Okay, let's start with number one. Let's replace want with need and see how that changes how we feel about it. Oh, they just need attention. Oh, they need attention. Okay, I'm feeling a different way about it, right? Now, I want to insert a little something here because it is all about this construct of needs, and I need it. I need more access to attention. Okay, that's the science. I need attention is the common everyday language. The science is I need more access to attention, right? And when we start thinking of it in terms of access points, we can start thinking of it in ways to create opportunities, right? as opposed to like, oh my gosh, I am just like, I can't give you that much. I only have so much inside of me, right? They're not necessarily saying you specifically. They're saying, I need more access to whatever it is I think I need. I need more access to food. I'm hungry. I need more access to your attention. I'm not getting enough. And even if you're like, my kid's a sponge. Okay, then let's dig into that. What is it they're needing? If we eliminate that it's actually attention because they're getting it 24/7, then we got to, what is it they're actually trying to get? Because they're not feeling fulfilled by what they're getting, right? Have you ever eaten just like this enormous meal and you were like stuffed with it, but you weren't satisfied, you know? And you were still like, I thought I was just hungry, but that didn't hit the spot. It's the same sort of things. We don't always know exactly what we need, but if we get everything that we think and we still aren't, we're like, no, that wasn't it, then we got to dig deeper, right? So access. I I could go on about this one, but I'm gonna skip ahead, right? Going into the next one, and I like the way I set these out are a little different than a lot of other people do, but I really like just to keep it on the A's, like the triple A's really help me come back into like, especially when I'm in the moment and I'm like, okay, this can only be this, this, or this, right? They all start with an A. What are they, right? So access. The second one is avoidance / escape. And those two are subtly different, and we'll talk about the subtle difference. And they mean they're I need to stay away from it, that's avoidance, or I need to get out of it, that's escape. So for instance, if you have I'll give you a school example. You have a kid every day at 11 o'clock, he's like losing his mind on the way in from recess. And this is how subtle they are, right? And he does something and he gets sent to the principal's office. And he's up there for half an hour before it's sorted out. And he makes his way back to class and he's fine. Every day, the same thing, right? And they're thinking, he just doesn't want to come in from recess. Obviously, right? A little bit of digging, this is why the function matters, finds out that no, he actually doesn't want to go to math. And guess when math is? It's right after recess, right? But he starts the behavior, so he never has to get there. That's avoidance, right? And so the difference from escape is he's already there and we're in math and math has started. And it's like, okay, I need you to da da da. And now he's throwing the desk. That's escape. I'm in it. I'm out. All right. So that's a subtle difference there. We'll talk a whole lot more about those and we'll go through some examples. And I'm going to pause here in a minute because I want to hear if you guys have like any scenario you want to throw at it and just be like, oh, I see what you're talking about. Okay. All right. The third one is automatic reinforcement. And this is one I can almost guarantee you've never heard of unless you've twirled in the world of ABA. What we often hear is people say, oh, they have some sensory issues. They have something sensory happening. They have some sensory overstimulation. They're talking about automatic reinforcement, right? And that basically means my body needs something. I, as an observer on the outside of another person's body, when it's automatic reinforcement, I can't begin to tell you what it is the body is getting from whatever that action is. There's no way to observable tell you. There's just no way, right? For instance, a kid that is banging their head. If I can rule out, oh, they're not banging their head to get that toy, and they're not banging their head because they want you to send them to their room. They're just sitting there over there by themselves, banging their head. I got nothing, but something is getting fulfilled. right? And that's that automatic reinforcement. Sometimes I get ahead of myself, y'all. Let me peek at the next slide. Okay, I didn't. But I could have stayed there a little longer. Automatic reinforcement also comes from things like, if I'm sitting here right now and I take off my shirt, what would you guys assume? Would you make an assumption about that behavior? Anybody have a guess? What might be the cause for me to take off my shirt?
You're hot.
I might be hot. That's an automatically reinforced behavior, right? I'm hot. I take off my shirt, I cool down, right? That's an automatically reinforced behavior. I see somebody eating, I can assume that they're hungry, and that could be they're doing it for hunger. I could think maybe they're doing it for stress. I could think maybe they're doing it because they just really like the taste of that thing. Whatever it is inside of their body. You know, like I can't really assume why, but I know it's automatically reinforced. Does that make sense? So those are those. Some notes about attention. I like to talk a good bit about attention. Oh, wow, and we're zooming right along. I do that, y'all. When I get going, I'll start going fast. So if y'all want to slow me down, you feel free to do so. Old school. We were told this so many times. I was told it so many times. I parented this way in the beginning. Okay, so I just want you guys to know that I'm never speaking to you from a place of judgment. I'm most often speaking to you from a place of I already did it and it didn't work. All right, so some notes about attention that I've collected over the years. When you're told to ignore it and it will go away, that is both true and false. Ignoring the person will make the behavior worse, right? And so what I mean by that is, let's suppose that your kid is doing something, and you're pretty sure they're trying to get your attention. They're like, you're there talking to a friend, right? Because that's what happens. As soon as you get on the phone, or as soon as you turn and talk to a friend, there they are. They're like right there. They're rubbing on your leg and they're tugging on your shirt tail, right? And it's like, that is saying, I want your attention. We were taught that if we ignored that thing that we didn't want, it would go away, right? And the partial truth of that is, if we ignore that person, the behavior that they're doing will absolutely stop because it's not working. And then they replace it with something bigger. And if that one's ignored, they stop because it's not working. And then they replace it with something bigger until they finally get to the line where you're like, what? What do you want from me? Right? They found you. They found your line. And now I've taught them, hey, if you want my attention, here's the line you need to show up at. Because I wasn't willing to give it to you when you were just saying, Dad. Right? So when we're doing these things, we have to be so aware that, here we go, if access to attention cannot be safely, if you can, like, if there's a behavior there, right, and you know this is going to go somewhere that I can't avoid it, I'm going to have to attend to this no matter what. There's going to be a safety concern. I know where this goes. I know how this pattern works. I know where the escalation is. I know they are going to wear me down, and I'm going to give it. Okay? Be honest with yourself. If you know that's where you're headed, give them what they want in the very beginning while that behavior is little. Don't wait till it gets to a big explosion and give it to them then. Right? And you're hearing me right. You're hearing me right. I'm not saying don't give it to them when they're doing the thing you don't want. I'm saying if they're doing a little thing that you don't want and you haven't put anything in place, you haven't taught them a replacement behavior, you don't have any plan in place, nothing like, and you're like, oh, I know the trajectory of this. Stop it right here. Say, here you go. Cut it off right there. Because if you wait till it's up here, that's a much, much bigger intensity behavior tool that worked. And that kind of tool works every single time. When you're in a classroom full of kids and you throw a chair, that works every single time. Right? When you're at home and you're throwing a dish, or you're slamming a door, or you're punching your brother, or you're saying F you to your mom, you know it. You find the one that's going to work every single time, right? And so if we're not reinforcing, if we're not cutting it out down when it's really small, and we're just using ignoring as a tactic, it doesn't work. It just makes your problems bigger in the long run. Okay? If that makes sense to you guys. All right. Same sort of notes, some notes about escape, some of the same stuff, and some a little different. Escape can be passive or it can be active. And this is what I mean by that. You can ask me to go clean my room, and I can just sit here. I can just sit here all day, right? That's a passive escape. I'm not doing anything. I'm just allowing my body to be completely non-compliant. That's a passive escape. Those are probably more frustrating than the active ones, y'all. Man, a kid that can just be like, no, I'm good. That can really get under your skin. And you see that too, as they get a little older, they're in that 8 to 12. They will, they're just like, I have recognized that my body has grown in such a way that you can no longer make me. And so I'm just gonna say no, right? So that can be passive, but they can also be active. They can run, they can hide. I've definitely had kids run from schools, run from homes. So that either one of those can happen. I had a kid one time who would completely escape a 4th grade classroom by laying down in the middle of the floor and going to sleep. And she would go to sleep. She could go to sleep on demand. And the other kids would just step over and walk around and walk around and walk around. And it was like, what do you do with that? Right. By the way, there's stuff we could do with that. And we did. And we did. She's on her way to fully functioning adulthood. That was a few years ago. So the same thing, if escape cannot be safely denied. And let's talk about what that means. It's better to grant the escape when it's really small, right? So let's say that you have a kid who like, for whatever reason, they need to get out of their current container. Like, it's too much for them. It's emotionally too much, or there's a demand where they're just like, it's just too much for them, right? If it's, if they're doing a small thing and they're saying, I need to take a break. I need to take a break right now. And we don't honor that. And then it goes to, now I'm punching something. Now I'm throwing something. Now I've hurt someone. Now I'm, right? If at the end of that, you're going to send this kid to their room for the rest of the night, just let them take a break at the beginning. Because then at least you don't have all of these behaviors that they've exhibited. And what we were talking about at the beginning, it's not just the fact that in this container, we've exhibited a behavior that doesn't feel good for all of us. When we get beyond that container, I now have to process how I feel about that behavior and how everybody else felt about that behavior too. And now I got to dig through my self-worth and blah, 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 blah. I would rather work with a kid on it who I stopped at, is there something I can help you with? As opposed to now the, now the chair's across the room, right? So if we know that we have to give in, if we know that we're in a place where like there's access to the highway, or, we're somewhere that literally we cannot control the environment. And I know that my kid can get physically aggressive, or I know that my kid can exhibit things that are unsafe. When they start to escalate, I need to know that about me, and I need to know that about my kid. And I need to know I need to cut this off here when it's small, and I will deal with the repercussions later because I reinforced something I shouldn't have. But I didn't get to the point where now we're going to have long-term damage to undo. Okay, and this little thing is probably not very popular. This opinion, I know it's not very popular. It's never been very popular, but I've seen it over and over and over, right? In the place where we didn't give in when it was small, because it was small. We didn't feel pressured to give in. But then when it got to when it was huge, we didn't have a choice and we felt like we had to give in. Right. And so we just kind of kicked ourselves, in the rear end. Yeah, for sure. There's a lot to be talked about emotional dysregulation. And again, this is one of those things like I'm working through this as an adult. It's like when we're adults that weren't taught these things as a child, or went through, disabilities, or went through traumatic experiences, and we get to be an adult and suddenly we're just like having to reparent ourselves. It becomes very actually helpful when understanding our children, when we've done the work on ourselves, right? And so it's a big deal. Like I've done so much more. Next week, when we talk about contingencies, we're going to talk about replacement behaviors and breathing. We're going to talk about breathing a lot. It's my favorite replacement behavior to teach. And because it does it gives the body, no matter what, whether the body wants it or not, some emotional regulation. And so that's a big one, but there are behaviors that can be taught and reinforced that literally will regulate whether you want to be regulated or not. Because often when we're dysregulated, we don't want to be regulated. We're ticked. We don't want to be regulated right now. We want to feel the empowerment of the dysregulation, right? And so there are ways to teach and work through that. Gotcha. I'm just closing it. I'm just closing the chat altogether. All right, moving on. All right, here's where we get to the really meaty stuff. Those are the primary functions, right? And there are subtle differences. Like we said, it can be excess of this, and I really am going to take my shirt off because it is warm. But how do we figure it out? And that's the thing too, when I was saying and even as we're figuring it out, we're going to be looking at what might be the primary stuff, because there's always these nuances, there's always, it's not just this. I'm not just angry. I'm also right? And so how do we find the function? Here we go. You will get so good at this that you just do it in the moment and you'll know it. Like it'll be like, oh, I see what just happened. I see what's happening now, right? This is familiar. This is a pattern. The behavior might look a little different, but I see the pattern. Here's how I'm going to respond so that I can best support the need while not encouraging that thing that I don't really like and giving them something else to do, okay? And here's how we get all of that sorted. We don't have to take data, okay? But we do, especially if we're in a school and we're really looking at a kid that's not hours around the clock. It's a little different when we're a parent and we have a kid that we have around the clock, you know, or we've had, if they're our own biological child, we've had since birth, or if there's a child we're caretaking or adopted, or we've had for this huge amount of time, it's different because you're immersed with that child. And so you pick up things that you might not even know you picked up, right? So when I say data, I don't necessarily mean that you're taking it with pen and paper, but you might. It might be that situation where you're like, yeah, I can't figure this one out, and I'm writing it down. That's the quickest way to see a pattern. If you have something that you can't figure it out, get out your pen and paper and we'll write it down, okay? And so what you're taking is called ABC data. ABC is pretty easy enough to remember. It's antecedent, behavior, consequence. And when I take this data, this is exactly what I do. I'm gonna show you my piece of paper. It looks just like that. That is literally all I do. And then I'm ready to go. And all that means is when something happens that there's a behavior being exhibited, whether it's they're throwing something and you're like, whoa, that's not something that feels good for us in our container, right? That's not something that feels good for everyone. How can we, what do we do about that? They're throwing something, they're kicking something, they're screaming, they're talking back, they're telling you no, they won't go to bed, they won't take a bath, they won't brush their teeth, they won't do their homework, right? We need to know the antecedent. That's where we start. And that is what is happening or what just happened prior to the behavior. Okay. When I say antecedent, I mean a lot of things. What I typically will get from somebody when I ask is they'll say, if I'm in a school, I'll often get something like, well, we were in math. We were at recess. They were in guidance, right? If I'm talking to a parent, they'll be like, well, it was after school, it was TV time, it was bedtime, it was dinner, it was that kind of stuff, right? We got to get a whole lot more information than that when we talk about antecedent. Antecedent is literally every observable, measurable thing that you can see, and in addition to what you brought with you. Because I don't know what anybody else brought with them on the inside of themselves, but I know what I brought with me, right? And so I'm being super aware of these things. And it's stuff like, when I do an observation, it's a little intense, y'all. It'll say, when I start that, it's going to say, what time is it? The time of day is so important. Anytime you start taking data, one of the first things I start looking at is what time of day is it? Is this happening first thing in the morning? Is this happening just before lunch? Is this happening right after they eat a big meal? Is this happening at 6 o'clock at night? Is this at 9:30 p.m.? I want to know, do we have any time links to this pattern? I always write down the time. I always write down the day of the week. Is this every Monday we're looking at this? You'd be surprised how sometimes you don't even notice it's every Monday you're looking at this, right? Or it's every Friday I'm looking at this. You don't realize it until you start actually tracking it and you're like, oh my gosh, I never realized this. They do this every single week at this time. Holy smokes, that's a lot of information just on that. Because now, what do you got, Carrie?
I was just going to say it's interesting because we've been tracking and we have a lot less issues on the weekend. And I was thinking, well, why is that? And it's because there's so many less demands made.
Yeah, so that's the next thing you do, right? So once you identify a pattern, this is every Tuesday at 3:30. What in the world? Then you start it's all in that, what's in that container, what's in the container coming up. I'm writing the time, I'm writing the time of day. I write crazy stuff, y'all. I write, is it hot? Am I hot right now am I cold? Is it bright in here? Are these fluorescent lightings? Is it dark in here? Do we need lighting? Is the couch we're sitting on comfortable? Is it uncomfortable? I am writing all sorts of things. Is there music playing? What kind of music is playing? Who all is present? Can I hear the people in the next room? Can I hear the TV in the next room? What's on the TV in the next room? All of these things are being picked up by our brain, whether we recognize them or not. Okay. And if we're dealing with, I was speaking with a friend earlier today about hypersensitive people and the recognition that I'm a hypersensitive person. And which is why I'm so good at my job, because I just notice all the things I told you, plus probably 100 more variables, right? Just from right here. And so when you're dealing with a child who has any sort of hypersensitivities, they're aware of a lot more than they might let on that they're aware of. And even if they're not consciously aware of it, their body and their brains are picking up all of this stimuli. So the more that you can be aware of, the better off you'll know about finding those patterns in your environment, right? Just something to think about antecedents. Behavior, the behavior itself, and I always get a whole bunch of disbelief when I say this. The behavior itself is the least important piece of information for me. The topography, what the behavior looks like, it's the least important piece of information to me for the puzzle, because it's just a tool. It might as well be a hammer or a screwdriver or a drill or a shovel or and I've definitely used tools not for their purpose, right? If I didn't have what I needed, I was like, what do I have? What can I use? And that's what we do with behavior. We might not have the behavior we need. It might be a skill that we've never been taught. Behavior is all learned. It's all taught. It's all a response. We're born knowing how to cry and breathe, eat, use the bathroom. And the way we communicate about anything is we cry. And then our caregiver says, oh, you're crying. Let me see if you need a new diaper. Let me see if you need some food. Let me see if you need me to hold you. And then our cry starts to change in response to what we get, right? And now we have different cries. And now our parents go, oh, that's the cry where they need a new diaper. Oh, that's the cry where they're hungry. And that's how our behavior starts to build. It has nothing to do with what we start with. It has everything to do with what's happened in our environment and how our environment has responded to us, right? And for me, that gives me a ton of hope, because no matter what is happening with somebody, I know that if we change the environment, they have the potential to change their behavior. Okay, so that's the thing about behavior is when I get called in and they want to talk like hours and hours about, oh, they did this or oh, they did that, I'm like, got it. Now let's talk about the important stuff. So anyway, that's my thought on behavior. Consequence is the last thing that we track, and it's what happens right after the behavior was exhibited. Okay. And I know I have a slide on that, so I'm not going to go deep. There is a difference between consequence and punishment. Oh, look, I'm so far ahead of myself, y'all. Antecedents. Here's a bunch of them listed out. These are all things that we can change. We can change anything in the antecedents, right? That's where our power to head behavior in a different direction starts there. What's the location? And if you're taking that data and you just say home, you might have to do better than that. You might have to say living room. You might have to say their bedroom, my bedroom, kitchen, hallway, right? Backyard. You might have to give more. Number of people matters. If you're doing something for attention and you have one person, it's one thing. But if you're doing something for attention and you have a whole audience of like 5 people, that's a whole nother thing, So the number of people that you have present really matter. The light and the noise levels matter, especially for people with sensitivities. People are sensitive to light. People are sensitive to noise. Some people don't even notice. You know, they really don't. I have a friend who literally will stand right next to the oven while the alarm goes off. The timer is like ding, ding, ding. And I come from across the house and I'm like, oh, you didn't hear that? And they're like, right here. They're like, what? I like never heard it, you know? It's like some people just don't. Me, I'm like a mile away and I'm like, what is that noise? So it's good to be aware again of your own sensitivities, but tracking the patterns of your child. One of the things about this light and noise level, and something I don't have on my list that I need to add, is space. And I don't mean the physical manipulation of space, which is down at the bottom. That just means we can rearrange the furniture, we can rearrange the lighting, we can rearrange the physical space. What I mean is like the empty space in a container. If you've ever experienced walking into like a warehouse that has this huge empty space, or ones that are super triggering for some of our kids are gymnasiums and cafeterias. And people are always like, because it's so loud. It's because it's so loud in a huge space. And that empty space actually has a sound of its own that magnifies everything. Right. And so it's being an awareness of like just a big space, even without noise, can be overwhelming. If anybody's ever experienced that for themselves or, you know, with kids, you see that, like you'll see it's fine. Some people can take their kids to a smaller, like a Dollar General or something like that, but Walmart is off the books. A Sam's Club with the high ceilings, that's off the books, right? It's just the space itself is too overstimulating. Down at the bottom, this is huge. Increasing the skill level of all participants. That's an environmental variable that we can and will change, right? Because it's not just a lot of times what I see and the expectation is, okay, well, my kid needs to change this, this, and this. And so we're going to teach them this new skill and away we're going to go. But it might not just be the kid that needs a new skill. You know, the adult might also need some skills. They might need some skills on boundary setting. They might need some skills on contingency setting. They might need some skills on breathing as a replacement behavior, right? Like, just because we are above the magic number 18 in age doesn't mean we suddenly manifest all of these excellent adult skills to parent ourselves and others. No. So when we run into something with our kids, it's not always one person who needs to develop a skill in a certain area. It's more often than not a little bit of everybody, you know, that can benefit from something. And the other thing is you're never going to ask someone to exhibit a skill that you don't know if they have, or you know they don't have, or you haven't taught them, or you haven't practiced it, or you can't just like be in the middle of a meltdown and be like, okay, I need you to breathe now. It's not going to work. Like you can't in the middle of the crisis do the thing. So all of the skill teaching comes outside of the behavior. It's very intentional. All right. So that was our loop back around to antecedents. Behavior, which I talked about already because I got ahead of myself. This right here is it's like I said, these are in the science, and I do want to talk about this a little bit. When we are when we're taking our data, if we're writing it down, we want to be aware of how we feel, but we cannot record how that person feels because we don't know, right? We might know that they're crying. We might know that. And we might make an assumption about that. We might say they're crying because they're sad. I've cried for probably every emotion there is, right? It's one of those behaviors. I just told you it was our first one. We cried for food. We cried for attention. I've cried because I'm sad. I've cried because I'm happy. I've cried because I'm angry. I've cried because I'm frustrated, right? So what I will see though is somebody will say, Johnny did blah, blah, blah because he was angry. I don't know that part. I can't know. That's a huge assumption. I can probably say Johnny's fists were clenched and he was shaking his arms and growling at me. I can say that in the behavior section, and that's what I would say. But anything else that I said about it is my own assumption and my own lens of experience. And I'm not saying that it's wrong that he's angry. He might be, but I'm saying I can't assign that value. And so that's what it's when I'm talking about when you're kind of defining it, you want to keep that piece without your judgment, which means without your emotion, without assigning your interpretation of it. So we want to put all that in a way that I say passes the stranger test. If you write something down and you say, Alice threw a fit. That's what you recorded in your behavior section, right? And another adult that you know is gonna, and you're like, hey, would you do this data for me or whatever? Could you just like write? And they're like, Alice threw a fit. Yeah. They have an imaginary scene that plays in their head that looks like Alice throwing a fit. Just like the person who wrote it has a scene playing in their head that looks like Alice throwing a fit. And Tiffany would have a different scene, and Carrie would have a different scene, and Tara would have, everybody would have a different scene of what they imagined it looked like for Alice to throw a fit. And therefore, we don't have any good data whatsoever. We don't know anything, right? But because that's a judgment, I decided a fit is just a subjective term. And I said, oh yeah, that's it, based on my own experience. But Alice laid on the floor and kicked her feet against the floor and screamed F you at me. Okay, I don't care who you are. You can walk in and go, is Alice on the floor? Yep. Are they kicking their feet? Yep. Are they screaming F you? Yep. Got it. I know what you're talking about. It passes the stranger test. You don't have to know Alice to interpret it. Okay. So when you're thinking about how do I define my behaviors to keep all of that judgment out of there, right? It's just like, this is literally what I see. And also knowing that I don't see everything, but this is just what I see. Okay. That second bullet point, there's some things to say about it. You want to avoid those definitions that include unobservable events like internal emotions, which is what I just said. You don't want to say they did this because they're sad. They did this because they're angry. They did this because they're, just say they did this. It doesn't mean that emotions don't exist, because we all know they do, right? It doesn't mean they're not expressing emotion. It doesn't mean they're not feeling emotion. It doesn't mean that emotion isn't a ginormous variable of what's going on. It just means that in this particular place, the way we can have the most value is to keep everybody's emotions out of it. We don't want to tie any emotions anywhere to a tool, especially a tool that we would like to get rid of and replace with something else. Okay, so that's just the caution there, because sometimes people read into it like, what do you mean? Of course there's emotions. How can I not say there's emotions? Of course there's emotions, right? That takes us all the way back to the whole reason why we're going through this is the purpose, is the function, is the need. When there's an unmet need, we're going to feel some kind of way about it. We all do. I do. I don't know a human that doesn't, right? So that's where we are with topography. I knew this slide was in here, y'all. Consequence, not punishment. It gets very confusing, and I hear this a lot, and I've heard this for so many years. And somebody will say, "Oh, my kid, blah blah blah," and somebody else will say, "Well, what was their consequence?" In other words, how did you punish them? Right? Consequence and punishment are not the same thing. And punishment's a whole soapbox I could spend all night on. Okay, so let's talk about what consequence actually is, especially in the terms, in the structure of taking our data. Antecedent, behavior, consequence, as you guessed, consequence is whatever happens right after the behavior. It's however the environment responds. Literally. It doesn't mean you gave them a consequence. It means however the environment responds. Right? They hit their brother. What did their brother do? Did they scream? Did they cry? Did mom or dad yell? Did somebody say stop? Did the brother fall over the couch and break the table? What happened right after? Give me a description of that. That piece is gold. This is where we really get some insight into the purpose and into the need. Because when we can establish a pattern in those things that look totally different, that's where we start being like, oh, I see. So how is the environment responding? And so here's an example of that. Let's say that, oh gosh, the one I just gave you, whatever. So let's say that your kids are playing video games. Siblings. 2 siblings playing video games, right? And one's playing, they're playing, and one's like, you cheat. They slam the thing down, right? And the other one is like, no, I'm not, it's okay, come back and keep playing. So then the kid gets and they start playing again, right? If I wrote that in ABC data, I'm gonna be like antecedent. Thursday, 7:30 p.m. My kids are playing Animal Crossing, or whatever they're playing, right? Probably Minecraft. My kids are Minecrafting, okay? Susie threw the controller and screamed at Sally. That's my behavior. My consequence is Sally said, come on back and play some more. When I start breaking that, and now I've got my data, and every time something happens, I write it like that. When I start looking over there on that end piece where it says, this is what happened was they got some positive attention from their peer and they got to access the game, right? A few days later, Sally and Susie are playing something else. Susie gets mad, stomps off. Sally goes and gets them and says, it's okay, come on back, we'll work it out. And they come back and work it out and they keep playing. That's an exact mirror of what just happened. But if we don't start putting it in this ABC, we don't see that right away. We don't see, oh, we were playing a competitive game, and that's something else. What were we playing? Was it competitive or was it cooperative? There's a big difference. It's a huge triggering difference there between a competitive game and a cooperative game. Okay, and I'll jump into that in a moment. And then the behavior, it wasn't the same behavior. It was something else, but it was similar. And what happened? It got positive peer attention and access to the desired thing. After a while, I start to notice that this behavior is irrelevant. They're just using it to get positive peer attention and access to the thing, right? Do you see how those patterns start to show up? But if you're not writing them out, they look like just random things that aren't even related. Okay. Consequence also at the last bullet says it can include the immediate, the most impactful, and it can include the long term. And what I mean by that is if that happened and they all sorted it out, that was the end of it. But a lot of times what happens is at this point, and quite often because of safety, an adult intervenes, right? And so the immediate consequence might be, okay, I'm gonna give you, this is my favorite. This happens at schools all the time. A child will do something that they find their way to the principal's office. And then they get up to the principal's office and the principal has a chat with them. And then the principal picks up the phone and they call, tink, 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 mom or dad or grandma. And then mom or dad or grandma has a chat with them. Right? And then it's all good. And they get back to the class and then the teacher has a revisit with them. And then they get home and they get another revisit with mom and dad because now they're face to face or whoever caregiver is. And then that weekend when the whole family gets together, they all talk about it. If I'm a kid who did X, Y, and Z because I wanted to access attention, I hit the mother load. That's what I mean by long term. There can be a consequence that happens right there, but we can continue to give reinforcement and consequence to something that we're now a week separated from. How many times have our parents said to other people, yeah, let me tell you a story about Cole. When he was a little kid, he blah, blah, blah. Here's his most shameful moment. Let me talk about it. Parents do that all the time, right? We just do it. I don't know why we do it. But it can take a short-term consequence and it can extend it and really, really cement a behavior. You're like, why is that sticking around? And I'm like, well, do you see how much it's getting? It's getting a huge payoff for a tiny little bit of effort. I'm gonna use that tool again. Okay. So there's that thing on like consequences can be long lasting and can continue to come in. So the thing is when you're attending to a behavior, as soon as you can wrap it up, you wrap it up. The end. You don't want to just keep giving it more fuel, right? I'm talking about a behavior you want to go away. If it's a behavior you want to stay, that's a whole different thing. Real quickly, a note on cooperative and competitive games with children and adults, maybe too, whatever. We do a lot of competition. And that goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, this or that. If you're the winner, therefore I must be the loser, right? If I'm not that, then I must be this. And so we find a lot of games get set up in a competitive way and they trigger kids. All of these games that get played very innocently, musical chairs. Here's a game that I no longer do it competitively. I do this with kids and they must do it cooperatively. And this is what I mean. When you play musical chairs, you have the kids all start with exactly the right number of chairs. The music starts and they all start to circle the chairs. And then somebody moves a chair. And then when the music turns off, everybody has to sit down real quick, only there's not enough chairs. And so somebody is now out. So that kid who's now out has some feelings about being out, right? And if we're doing musical chairs, we're probably talking about little kids, but who knows? I've seen it with adults. It's even more fun with adults when you do it my way, right? You move a chair, that kid's out. You do it again, you move a chair, that kid's out. You're going down the list, basically eliminating kids to get to one person who was quick enough and strong enough to claim that one seat until you're in at the end. Who feels good at the end of that game? Maybe the last kid sitting, I don't know. That's what I mean by a competitive game. We run into a lot of emotional issues when our kids are not emotionally equipped to handle certain things. And if we haven't taught them certain skills about competition, they're not equipped. I prefer to teach social skills with cooperative games. And I'm going to stick with musical chairs. In my version of musical chairs, every time the music starts and they start walking, a chair is moved. Every time the music stops, everybody sits. The end. Everybody sits, right? So at the end of round one, somebody's sitting on someone, and that's okay. At the end of all the rounds, there's one chair and everybody's sitting. Do you know the cooperation it requires to get 12 people sitting on one chair? Right? That's the difference. And at the end of that game, how does everybody feel? Some of the kids are like, you're too close, but they're laughing and giggling and they want to do it again, right? And the kids are actually like, here, let me hold you. You can stay. I got you. For me, a cooperative game is the way to go every time. When you start looking, I need some games to do with kids. It's important to put that word in your Google search, cooperative games, because we naturally do competitive and it almost always brings up conflict. And if you're not prepared to give the skill to work through that conflict, let's start with cooperative games. All right, a little bit of soapbox for y'all. Okay, we're going into, let me give a little time check. All right. We're going into how does this information help us, this ABC? When you're collecting it, I should say this, you really cannot make a pattern if you don't have at least 5 data points. So if you're doing this ABC, you're like, man, my kid is just, whatever the thing is that you're looking at, I got to do something about this. I'm going to write it down. I'm going to collect my data. You can't make a pattern if you only have 1 piece of data or 2 pieces of data or 3 pieces of data. At that 3rd piece, you're getting suspicious. You're like, I think I see what's happening here. That 5th piece locks it in for you. If you have 5 data points and you can get a pattern from that, you can feel pretty good about it. Okay, so you want to have at least 5 data points. And if they're doing something that they're doing it 100 times a day, it might only take you 1 day. But if you're doing something that they're only doing once or twice a week, it might take you 2 or 3 weeks before you have enough to start really figuring out what's going on. Okay? When we start to analyze that data, the A, the B, and the C, here is how each one of those sections helps us, right? When you look at that antecedent stuff, that's going to start showing you what's triggering this. What in the environment is poking at this unmet need? That's where we see it. In school systems, we often will see something like the kind of patterns that will jump out at me will be like transitions. Oh, this kid is having all of their behaviors in transitions in the hallway, in the from class to class, from the bus to the school, right? And we start to go, oh, now let's look at transitions. Are there things that we can put into place during those times that would support this kid so they don't need to do these behaviors? I can make a change right there and then see if I get a response. Okay, that's talking about the antecedent, and a lot of powerful stuff can be done there. Sometimes you can get some, when you're just doing this for yourself, it's one thing. You don't have to pass anybody's criteria, right? You're like, no, my kid, I'm doing it. We're looking at antecedents. We're shifting this. Sometimes in my work, what I'll run into is a really old school type of thinking that says, no, we're not changing anything. You're just working around. You're just working around that behavior. They're going to do what I say, and that's it. I got to take a lot of deep breaths with that, y'all. Am I just working around? No, I'm not working around. I'm saying we're triggering. We are triggering. And by we, I mean this environment. Something that an adult is doing is triggering this situation. is there some way that we can adjust it so that we can stop triggering it long enough to teach a different behavior to get the need met? I can't teach in crisis. And if I can't change the antecedent, how am I ever going to get out of crisis long enough to teach what they need to know, right? And so if you just start moving around your antecedents, beautiful. Are you kidding me? If I can change the lighting and it helps a kid not chew their fingernails, holy smokes, $4 for a new bulb at Lowe's. You can call me a workaround all you want, right? If I can change an antecedent, if I can change something in environment, if I can change the bedtime, I see bedtime as an issue. If I can change the bedtime, if I hear that my kid is like, I find out they're not sleeping because they don't like the way the sheets feel, I'm not going to be like, too bad, so sad. I'm going to buy new sheets, right? Like, I have no problem changing the antecedent. I encourage changing the antecedent. I encourage changing the environment, because all behavior is in response to the environment. If we never change the environment, you can expect that we're going to keep getting that behavior. It's not going to change, or it's certainly not going to get better. Okay, so that antecedent is where we identify, can we make environmental changes? All right. Analysis of the behavioral patterns. That just tells you everything they've got in the toolbox. Here's all the things that they've thrown at me so far. You can learn a lot about your child's level of verbal skills, their level of gross motor movements, of fine motor movements, by analyzing the tools that they're using to get their needs met, right? Are they screaming? Are they making noises? Are they, you see what I'm saying? We start to see, oh, you know what? Their tools are mostly verbal, but I see here that I didn't attend and it turned physical. And that's great. That brought me to a spot in your ABC data that I left out. Often you don't just go ABC done. That rarely ever happens, okay? What happens is you go, this happened, antecedent, this behavior happened, this consequence happened. Many times, depending on what that consequence is, what that response is, that becomes the new antecedent because that kid just did something else, right? Chances are when Susie threw that remote, Sally, unless she is just like profoundly empathic and compassionate, did not say, it's okay, sweetheart, come on back, right? They probably said, I'm not cheating, what are you talking about, right? That was the consequence. Sibling responded with a scream or what. And now Susie kicked the TV, right? My new ABC is they were playing a video, like arrow down, Sally screamed at them, they kicked the TV. TV broke and mom and dad got involved, right? Now mom and dad screamed. So a lot of times when you're doing your ABC, it's not just like, oh, that happened. It's quite often, whatever that first consequence was, triggered another entry, okay? And when you can start to see that that consequence can become the trigger for the next thing, that really helps you be aware of how you respond and what consequence you're given or you're giving, or if you just need to like, let me take a breath, right? I had a kid one time, cutest kid, right? She was about 8 years old and she had autism with limited verbal skills. And she was a firecracker and she loved Queen. And she would sing like Bohemian Rhapsody and all of this stuff. And she had this crazy hair and she would just headbang, but otherwise she wouldn't talk to you. But she would like, she loved Queen. And so one day we're there and every day in this program that I was running, there was a time of free play. So a lot of the day was structured. Everything was like handheld for these kids. They all had a one-to-one. But there was a time every day that was free play. And it basically was like the adults just kind of stood on the edge and let the kids like play, you know, on the mats with the balls and just how they interacted. And we just stayed out of the way and just let them apply. Unless there was a safety, then we were right there, right? So she walks up in the middle of this and stops right in front of us, drops her pants and screams, "Butt crack!" really loud. And we were all like nothing. Because this is what we do for a living. So we know that we don't have the luxury of a snicker, even a snicker. And we're going to see that kid's butt crack for eternity. We know this. And so this is something for you to be thinking about. When you walk in on something, your response is important. It's crucial. Better to have no response than an excess response. Unless, of course, they're 1 foot from the road, then you better be screaming your head off. Right? I mean, obviously safety. But yeah, we all just like, and she just like paused for a moment. She pulled her pants up and she went on her way, and we never saw it again. If we had laughed, if we had done anything, that kid would be 20 years old doing butt crack on the street, you know? So it's just like, you have to know like your own stuff and be aware that however you're responding to this is really going to be contributing in some way. And is it in the way you want to be contributing? Okay, so there's that. The last piece is analysis of the consequence patterns is where we find the function. And that's what this class is all about. We cannot start addressing or changing the environment or any of that until we know the function. Okay. This kid that did butt crack, we knew her well enough to know that the function of this was to access our attention. And so we didn't give it. Right? But what if we had removed her from the room? And what if we were like, oh, this is about attention and we're just going to move her so she doesn't get any? But what if that was really escape? And now we've removed her. What have we done? We've reinforced it. We said, hey, this is a tool that works. Bring it on out. We'll use it again. And we see that happening a lot. I'll see kids who they will learn to use their voice in ways that a lot of time adults will be like, oh, they just want attention. And I'm like, they actually want you to go away. They actually don't want your attention. They're actually screaming at the top of their lungs because they would like you to leave them alone, you know? And so if we don't get to the function, we could inadvertently reinforce something and keep it sticking around if we don't know why the thing is. I had a kid one time in a school and he would hit. That's how he would solve all of his conflicts. He would just hit the person. The end. If they said, that's just what he did. And so he often ended up in the office, right? Because it was unsafe. And again, it's not always this or that. We determined that he was hitting to escape the peer, not to get their attention. But what was doubly reinforcing was that he was going to the office and then his parents were being called. And so not only was he escaping what he didn't want, he was accessing what he did want. And so it was doubly reinforcing. He had two functions going on. One was, I don't want to have anything to do with this or y'all, but I want my parents' attention because I don't ever get it. And if I got to get it like this, it's how I'm going to do it. You know? And so we had to like really get deep there. And so we do that. We have to know the function, or otherwise we could be reinforcing the wrong thing. How many of you have seen that kid in the Walmart aisle, in the toy aisle, and they are just like losing their mind? They're just like crying and kicking, and I see that kind of thing, and immediately I'm like, these poor parents. I always have empathy. But I'm also like, I notice other people and I can see they're like having these judgments. And they might even be having a side conversation right there for you to hear. They don't care. They don't care to tell you what they think and about how you ought to pick your kid up and get them out of there. And I wouldn't buy them that toy. But okay, well, let me tell you, if that ever happens to be you, you tune them out because they don't have a clue what they're talking about. I've had kids kicking and screaming because they wanted a toy. And I have left my cart full of groceries and everything else right there in Walmart or wherever I am, and I have walked out to the car and I have gone home. The end. Oh, I'm sorry, you're eating toast for dinner? The groceries are at the store, right? That hasn't been that bad, y'all. But you see what I'm saying? If I know it's because they want access to a toy, I'm gonna get up and leave. But what if I know they're on the floor kicking and screaming because they want to go home right now and they have had it. They don't want to be there anymore. My tolerance is done. I'm sick of these groceries. I'm sick of these people. I'm tired. I'm ready to go home right now. I'm on the floor and I'm kicking and screaming. The worst thing I can do is leave my stuff right there and pick my kid up and put them in a car and take them home. Because I just said, that really worked to get your needs met. This is why the function is so important. Because something that looks this way, this is why I say the topography is the least important. Because something can look like this, and it can be for access, it can be for avoidance, escape, it can be for automatic reinforcement. And it can change. Okay, let's say that something started out as automatic reinforcement. This happens all the time, especially with some of our kids who do self-injurious stuff for emotional regulation, right? Whether they bang their head or they hit themselves or they bite themselves or they scratch themselves. That's all for emotional regulation. That's an automatically reinforced behavior. How I respond matters, okay? If I interrupt it minimally and I replace it and I do all of those things and I don't give it a whole lot of hoopla, it'll remain an automatically reinforced behavior until I'm able to change it. If I give it a whole bunch of attention, if I allow it to, oh, I'm taking you home. I know you don't want to be here and you're banging your head because you're frustrated. I'm taking you home. It will start to chain. It's called a chain. The behavior started as this, and now it's linked to this other function, right? And this other function is, oh, what used to be automatic reinforcement is now escape. Oh, what used to be automatic reinforcement is now attention. We can change the function depending on how we respond. How we respond is important. That consequence section is important. Okay, it's where we get that information. And all of our functional stuff comes from there. All right. Whoa, look at that. I think we're right on time where I wanted to be. So that was a whole bunch at you guys. I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen so I can see more of you. Oh, that's so nice. I wanted to wrap this up right at where we are, actually. I was hoping for about 20 minutes, which is great, because I wanted to leave room for any questions you had about any of that information and any questions you have about something specific. If you're like, whatever, how do I apply that to this situation or whatever? So I am opening the floor to you guys, to any comments or questions or anything like that. And I know y'all have stuff or you wouldn't be here.
Okay. This one's just a little one that popped into my mind. We're talking about, you know, a function that works. So about, was it escape or to get out of something?
Mm-hmm.
Going to bed. So when it's bedtime, all of a sudden somebody's so hungry, like they've never eaten before, you know, and as a parent, you're like, well, you know, my kid go to bed hungry. So
Mhm.
like, you know, and so that's like reinforced. And you know, it's you know, and that is not at all like a bad explosive behavior by any
No, but I
means.
get it.
But it is a continuous thing that,
And
you
so
know.
this is a common one actually. And through the years, I've worked through it in different ways, and I've heard different things, I've read different things, and really trying to pay attention to like how the body's feeling and what hunger feels like and what other things might feel like hunger, right? Um, and so you're basically dealing with an avoidance behavior, and kids do it. All adults, we do it all the time. I don't know what it is. I'll postpone bedtime when I'm dog tired, you know? Um, we all do it. And so that one is you're on that thing with the hunger. Several things. There's so much science out there. I'm not going to try to say this or that, or there's two sides. You shouldn't eat right before you go to bed. Right? I personally, me only, not any of you, and not telling you to do this with your children. My body actually prefers to eat right before I go to bed. It's almost like that digestion, energy gets diverted to digestion, and I'm sleepy. It's like that big Thanksgiving meal, right? What do you want to do afterwards? You don't want to do anything but sleep because your body needs every ounce of everything it has to digest. And I'm not saying
It's a
that for the kids.
cultural thing too.
Yeah,
I
and I'm
mean,
just saying
yeah, in
there's
South
so
America, they
many
eat at like 12.
so many variables, right? And also there are things like hunger and anxiety and exhaustion can all feel the same in the belly, right? The body feels its emotions. It actually physically feels its emotions. And so for a lot of people, a lot of adults who deal with like food issues and stuff like that, it's because the body feels an emotion about it. Me personally, I also had to work through like, am I hungry or am I anxious? It feels the same to me. And a kid can, I'm only recently able to do that. So a kid's not really doing that. So when they're like bedtime, it's not, it could be like, oh, I am now manipulating you because it buys me more time. Or it could just be like, I've hit that level of tiredness and I don't want to give it up, but I feel hungry. It could be all sorts of things, but it is that something. And so that's where you got to dig in. You start looking at like, okay, what time is this happening? And if I know that bedtime is at, and this is where I go, this kind of stuff I do. If I know that bedtime is at 8:30, and here we go again, I'm hungry. I'm going to give you a snack at 8 o'clock before you ever have the opportunity to say to me, you're hungry. At 8 o'clock, I'm going to be like, hey, come get your snack. Bedtime's coming up. Here it is. Right? And now I start to figure out if it was really hunger, is there something else happening now at 8:30?
That's the thing, is I know because I do give
All
them a
right.
snack.
So there you go. And so you just got to start. It's that kind of thing. And this one is a lot about like taking the data to find the function. Next week is a lot about what do you do about it? Now that we know why he's doing it, what do we do about it? So for anybody who's coming next week, I definitely invite you to track your data between now and next Tuesday on any, and don't try to check, FYI, never, 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 never try to track maximum, and I mean maximum of 3 behaviors at a time. Start with 1. If you absolutely have to, throw in a second one. I can't imagine why you would need a third, right? Unless you literally have like, well, I have 3 things that could cause severe bodily harm, track them right away. Okay, but otherwise, don't do that to yourself. Go, okay, what is the one thing that would alleviate some pressure in this container? Knowing that I can feel the pressure, what will alleviate my pressure in this container? That's where you can start. Oh, it's if the bedtime routine can get narrowed down to 15 minutes or whatever that, like whatever it is your goal you want to be, or you know what I mean? Track that one thing, whether it's I'm tracking bedtime because it's a difficult area. And so my antecedent is it's 8:15. Ask them to go to bed. They're refusing to put on their pajamas. They're asking for a snack. They're bouncing off the walls. They're like literally making themselves move so they don't fall asleep. Write that, right? And then in the consequence section, you want to write however you responded. And you probably also want to write duration. How long did it actually take, right, for you to get to bed? Because when we start doing stuff to that, you might not feel a difference, but if you're tracking that, you might notice that it used to take 30 minutes and now it takes 25. And now it takes 20. And now it takes 15. But if you weren't really paying attention to it, you didn't notice that you were moving in the positive direction and you probably gave up right after week 1 or 2. Because you're like, nothing's changing, because you don't feel those minute changes if you're not tracking it. Does that make sense? And so you just really, I do invite each of you that if you're coming back next week, pick something that you're like, you know what, our household would run more smoothly if this one thing, if we could change this one behavior and track data on it and see if you see a pattern. And bring it up next week. We're going to have this time at the end, and we're going to be talking about contingencies, right? And what to do once we found that pattern. So I invite you to do that and bring it back with you. Okay. Who else? Dawn, did you have something? I thought I saw you waving at us. Oh, hi, Jessamine. Yes, we will. You'll get a recording of this. Absolutely. Oh, I think tomorrow, my tech guy, tomorrow or the next day. It should be relatively soon. He's pretty spot on.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah. All right. Sorry, Dawn. I was like, do you have something?
No,
And I started
That's
rambling.
okay. No, I just, so I actually had an FBA done on my daughter who is 7.
And
And
for
we
those
just
of you
had,
who don't know, an FBA is a functional behavior assessment. And it's basically someone like me comes in and takes a bunch of data and tries to analyze it to figure out why this is happening. All right, go ahead, Dawn.
so she is 7,
Mhm.
not, mostly nonverbal. Can I share diagnosis and all that, or not really?
Are you the parent? You can share whatever you want to share.
So she has Down syndrome. Like I said, mostly nonverbal. I mean, she does make, what do they call them, approximations for certain words.
But as far as functional communication, she can't really vocalize to get her needs met.
She can sign, she does sign, but the school she's at is more like they don't know a whole lot of sign there. She does have a sign language instructor that comes in for 15 minutes 4 times a week. So she's working on sign all the time, and we work on sign at home as well. But I do feel like communication is I think it's an issue with her. And the FBA, like you were talking about attention, and that's one of the biggest things that I don't know her title, but the person that did the observations, she felt like that was the biggest reason for her, the things that she was doing, which is like when she goes into the gen ed, she's mostly in the special ed room. So when she goes in the gen ed room for 30 minutes in the morning, they do circle time and all that, and then they'll hand out the kids worksheets, and my daughter will she doesn't really understand the worksheets usually, and she'll start pushing her paper on the floor and her classmates' papers on the floor, and to them that's a big deal because that's disrupting class. So the observer felt like that was her attention, which I agree, I think it is. So like, what do you do in that situation then? And she's got, like this whole list of new things that they're trying. And one of those planned ignoring is one of the things she wants them to try. And from what you were, it's like almost like you said or disagree.
Yep.
Like, I feel like you disagree with that, but I don't know.
Yeah, so this week was about the why. I do hope you come back next week.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, planned ignoring means I'm going to ignore that behavior, but it doesn't mean I'm going to ignore that person.
Okay.
Okay. So let's say that the behavior is swiping materials off the desk. I'm
Mhm.
not going to go over there and be like, why are you swiping these materials? Let's pick these things up. Let me help you get these things up. Da, 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 da. Now I'm attending to the behavior, right? Planned ignoring is, I could care less that things got swiped off the desk, but if what we're really dealing with is attention. Okay, and number one, I should be teaching attention as a like I should be teaching what to do instead. How I can't just do planned ignoring. I can ignore that behavior, but that other piece of that is, what am I giving the attention for? I have to still give the attention. What am I teaching her to use to get that attention? I got to be teaching her something. And if we're in a deficit, are there other times where we're getting non-contingent attention? If we're talking about a child who has limited access to their peers, and the minute they're in the class, they're doing something to get attention from their peers, I want to know, what's the plan for my child to get access to their peers' attention in positive ways? What are my opportunities? And if you're not providing opportunities, how are we ever going to meet this need for a peer's attention if I don't have opportunities to access it? So planned ignoring in itself is a beautiful tool, but it's a partnered tool. It's not a standalone tool. You have to have a replacement behavior that you're actually attending to and reinforcing, or otherwise she has no other tools. She'll just do something more intense if that one doesn't work. Does that
Okay.
help?
A little bit, yeah. How do but I guess I'll have people listening to your, I do plan on coming back next week because
Awesome.
I just want to know, how do you go about,
Do you have a BIP in place yet?
yes,
Okay. So they have that.
actually, that's actually what I'm looking at, yeah.
Cool.
I'm gonna have to look through this more thoroughly, so I'm more prepared next week.
No, you're totally fine. When we start talking next week, what we're going to be talking about is pretty much when I do a functional behavior assessment, it's incredibly specific. It's full of graphs. It is like so specific to that kid and what is happening. When I write a BIP, it is a framework. And it says, here is the format we're going to follow. We're going to teach replacement behaviors. We're going to provide non-contingent opportunities to get these needs met. And we're going to do first in contingencies to get these needs met. And that's what the document looks like. And then I meet with the people to talk about what the actual plan looks like. It looks like from 8 to 8:30, this is going to happen and this is going to happen. From 8:30 to 9, this is going to happen and this is going to happen, right? Because if we put that in the BIP, we're meeting every other week to write a new one because you want to revisit that data every 2 weeks. As part of your BIP, you should be collecting data, ongoing data collection, because how else would you know it's working or not? Right? So you want to, here's what I'm putting in place. I'm collecting data. I'm analyzing every bit of it every 2 weeks. Looking good, keep going. Not there, adjust.
Okay.
Right.
So we had our IEP meeting a week ago to discuss this. So,
Well,
and I
the good news that you as the parent can have another IEP meeting anytime you want.
right. Okay.
I mean, right, you know this, right? I will talk to you about your rights all day long. As a parent, you can call that school, you can write them an email right now, you can call them tomorrow, they have 10 days to schedule that meeting. And you can do that and you can have that one and schedule another one next day. Whatever it takes for you to get your needs met and your child's needs met.
Okay.
All right, y'all. Who else has anything else? We're wrapping in our last 10 minutes. Hey, Carrie.
Hey, I just had a question. I have a unique situation where my husband is super sensitive to noise, like extremely sensitive ears.
Hmm.
And I have an ADHDer who's 9, and he makes a lot
I
of
feel,
random.
I feel the pain. I feel your
Okay, you
husband's
get
pain right there.
I don't get it because like I'm right next to him and I'm okay, but
Hmm.
my husband, it physically hurts him,
Hmm.
his ears.
Yeah.
He does like a clicking with his tongue, and shrieks randomly.
It's shrill. It like hits decibels.
It does, and so it can't be ignored. I do think it is. I know I'm probably going back to old school, but I feel like it's an attention thing. I don't really know I don't know the function of it. After listening to you, I got to figure it out. But it happens randomly.
Mhm.
Happens when he's gaming. It happens when he just kind of does it.
This could be
Um,
one of those things that I talked about, starts as an automatically reinforced thing, but then it gets responded to in such a way that it's now
Yeah.
a tool that's used for multiple things.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So my question would be is like, if you can't physically ignore it due to pain, and normally, like, I think we've always been told just ignore it.
Well,
But
but
it
here's the thing. It's like, is it when you say you can't physically ignore it because of pain, there's kind of a thing. Oh, I see that, Jessamine. Maybe it is. I'm in Virginia. It's 10 day. You got to get on that. Sorry. I got distracted by the chat. Let me not look over there. If he's making the noise and it's a continuous noise and it's not stopping, is that what you're saying? As opposed to like a shriek, it stops.
Yes, a shriek, it stops, a click, 2 or 3 in a row, and then he's kind of like admonished.
Okay, so here's where you are. The thing is, once the sound is already out there, there's never any taking it back.
True.
Okay, so admonishing him is giving attention to something that you want to go away. And if you think attention is a piece of that, every time you do that, intensifies it and guarantees that it's going to stick around longer. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
it does.
your husband's ears are already hurting.
Yeah.
That's already happened. The pain is already there. Right? And so it's
Mhm.
not like he can, after the fact, undo it. But to think about going forward, if I respond to this in the way that I've been responding to this, it's going to keep happening in the way that it's been happening. It's likely going to increase and it's likely going to get worse. And so if I keep on bumping up against it, it's just going to get bigger and bigger.
Mhm.
Right. And so, and I know it's hard, but your husband is going to have to be like, what do I need to do? Do I need to walk out of the room? Like, do I need to go take a breath? Do I need to, like, I know right now that I want to knee-jerk response because I now have like a splitting pain in my head.
And that's the thing, is he gets a headache. That's
Yeah,
exactly
that's what I'm saying. It's like, yeah,
Yep.
I'm not devaluing. I like, I don't want to minimize your husband's experience, but I just want the awareness that the way that he's responding to something that already happened and he can't undo is
Mhm.
what's continuing to keep it going.
Okay.
If it is in fact linked to attention. And I don't know that for sure because we don't have all the data in front of us.
I don't know. I think some of it is just habit at this point, and some of it is done to annoy or to get attention, or
Yeah.
like you'll tell him to stop and he does it again, like right in front of you.
And so that piece, when you say to stop and he's like, let me do it again, that's an attention chain.
Right.
Right? Like that seems without any 5 data points. But if you're saying this happened, this is a regular thing, he says it to stop and then he does it again.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
him making an extra poke. Right?
Yeah.
And
It's
so
good.
if that's the thing you want to do or whatever, collect your data on it. We'll dig through it because oftentimes we find that something we thought was this thing over here, what we thought was a 6 was really a 9.
Okay.
Just depending on where we were standing and how we were looking at it.
You're right. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Anybody else before we sign off tonight?
I'm a little curious about what kind of her situation there. You we're talking about how that is, it seems like it's attention. Is there much difference between attention and control? You know, like the kids trying to get power? Is that like a different thing, or is
It's definitely different. And it's also like one of those things where control is an automatically reinforced behavior. It's something internal that I can't say that's why. I can't say that's why because I'm like, I just can't. I can have suspicions, you know, and I can look at the environment and go, does my kid really have a lot of choices over their life? And if not, they might be trying to get some. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about control. I feel like I have no control over my life, and therefore I'm going to take action to get some. Right? That's the same for me or you or anybody, where we feel like we're stifled by someone else or someone else is making all of our decisions. Right? And so that's a piece of, again, next week when we talk about contingencies, contingencies aren't just like, do this. And first you do this, and then I'll give you this. And that's what people think. Oh, well, if you do this, then I'll let you blah, blah, blah. No, it's all about a negotiation. It's all about making sure that your child has a voice and that you're teaching them how to negotiate to get their needs met. And we're not just telling them what their needs are and how we're going to meet them. We don't know. I mean, we do at some point because they're kids, right? Obviously, we were like, well, I was a kid once and I remember that I needed this. I know that kids need food, and I know that they need love, and I know that they need physical affection, and I know that they need sleep. And so, yeah, there are lots of things where you're like, okay, I'm helping a little human grow, and all humans agree that water and sunshine and food and all of these things will grow this little person. Right? Yes, there are some needs you absolutely know, right? But when you're like, is it control? Is it attention? When you start going through, it doesn't really matter. If what's resulting is they're getting access to attention, when you start making your plan about what to do about it, it's a negotiation. It's not a, here's the plan I made for you because I think this is in your best interest. It's you have the knowledge of what appears to be the unmet need. They probably can't tell you or communicate it. I can barely tell you mine sometimes, right? So they probably can't tell you, but that's where it starts. You actually start a negotiation. And if you say, first, I need you to clean your room, and then I'm going to give you, if you pre-decide that, there's no negotiation, right? That's a dictatorship. We're not teaching our children to use their voice. So that piece of choice, if it's for control, great. Let them negotiate. This is how we use our voice. This is what the tone looks like. Here is how it feels good for all of us. This is what I'm willing to give and take. What are you willing to give and take? Did we come up with a plan that works for all of us? Some kids are obviously in that place, right? They have the emerging language. They are able to be receptive. They're not going to sit down with you and make the whole plan, but they can probably talk to you and be like, oh, well, what I really want at bedtime, I think, I don't really know, but what I really want at bedtime is, and they'll tell you, and that's where you start going, okay, here's where I can get some momentum. Now they have some control over what's actually happening with them. I'm happy to reinforce them with that, even though I know that's not what they need. Like, whatever, you know, you start to really give voice to that and negotiate that, as opposed to what we typically have been taught to do, which is like, I know what's best. So first you do this, and then I'll give you this. And I don't understand why isn't this working? Right? Because we're not negotiating. They're another person here. Let's negotiate. Now, you do have some children who are like, they're not verbal, or they don't have the functional communication. They don't have the functional communication skills to do that level of negotiation, but there are still ways to enable that negotiation with kids who are nonverbal. We'll talk next week about preference assessments and how to kind of fill out, this kid like this or not like this. And I'm looking at the data, and my data says they want to escape, they need escape. What are the options I can give them? You know, and escape from a situation might not be get up and leave the room, but it might be, oh, I'll give them 10 minutes of video time, or I'll give them something that allows escape from my immediate environment. Doesn't have to be external, it can be internal, right? And so you just start noticing, oh, my kid really likes trains, dinosaurs. There's the top 5, y'all. I don't pick these randomly. You all know trains, dinosaurs, construction equipment, right? They're all there. And so you start to really recognize, okay, here's what my kid really likes. I'm going to see how they feel about it when I present it, you know? And then we end up with like a negotiation without a bunch of actual verbal language, but we still include them in those decision makings. If that helps that question at all. All right, guys. I think that is it for tonight. Yeah, Brandon will get this stuff all cleaned up for you and get it out to you pretty quickly. I don't want to speak for him because, you know.
The plan, Cole, is to clean it up and then post it in a unlisted YouTube video under your channel so that only participants will have access to it.
Cool. So you guys will get the link.
Thank you. That was great.